Hello and welcome to the big picture. The NDA government is completing 2 years in office, and we here at the big picture are looking at various aspects of the governance in these 2 years. While yesterday we looked at the economy, today we'll be analyzing the government's performance on the foreign policy front. Prime Minister Modi, who has led from the front on foreign policy from the day he took office 2 years ago, has continued to be at the forefront during the last 1 year too. Continuing his hectic travels abroad, he visited 25 countries during the last 1 year, some countries like US and Russia twice. What has been the focus of the government's foreign policy during the year, and what is it that Modi and his team have been able to achieve on this front? What have been the drawbacks and how should it be tackled? We will discuss all this today with Rajiv Sikri, former Secretary Ministry of External Affairs, SD Muni, Emeritus Professor JNU and a foreign policy analyst, MK Bhadrakumar, former ambassador, and Sanjay Kapoor, editor Hard News. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Sikri, you know, when Mr. Modi took office on this grand scale, all the SAARC leaders, being in attendance and all that, has that momentum, let us start from the SAARC region itself, south, the neighborhood. Has that momentum been kept?
I think it's a mixed picture. With some countries, there's certainly success, like Bangladesh. Bhutan is okay. With other countries, we started off well, Nepal, but then internal developments in Nepal have complicated the situation and there's been a severe setback. But the effort on the part of Mr. Modi was clear. With Sri Lanka, we have regained some ground. We thought we had regained more than we actually have, so it's a little neutral, I would say. Pakistan is the same as before. Despite all the efforts of Mr. Modi, I don't think we have progressed very far, and we are unlikely to. It remains a very knotty problem. And Maldives, again, I think relations are stable. There's not such a vituperative relationship. We've learned how to deal with each other. Afghanistan, certainly an improvement. Although after President Ghani came, there was a little bit of a dip when he thought he could do business with Pakistan. I think one area, one neighbor where he should focus a little more is Myanmar. Now that Aung San Suu Kyi and her party are in power, this is one gap in the immediate neighborhood that needs to be filled. I think I would like to add to the immediate neighborhood Iran also, where he's just completed a visit, where we have had, I think, a significant breakthrough. So that's as far as the immediate neighborhood.
Okay. Professor Muni, South Asia, starting from South Asia, would you by and large go with Mr. Sikri, or you have a...
I somewhat go with Rajiv. But what I find is that there is no stamp of neighborhood first in policy terms.
But that was supposed to be the first.
That's precisely why I am underlining it.
In the first year, that was what we were told.
There are two ways of analyzing any regime's foreign policy, either in comparison to the predecessors or in comparison to the statements and promises made.
Exactly.
And I think in terms of the statements and promises made, there is no real stamp that Mr. Modi has given a different turn to the neighborhood relations, I would hesitate to say. He has, like Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a continuing story. He has, of course, added the land border agreement in having it, but I doubt if peace lies round the corner, depending upon the stakes of the West Bengal Chief Minister and now the newly reinforced Chief Minister as it is.
Reinvigorated.
Nepal is, I mean, it is an understatement to say that the Nepalese have been, because of their internal problems.
Is it because of their internal problems?
No, it is because of their internal problems as well. But at the same time, we have reacted at times in a manner which was not quite desirable, I would say the least. I mean, for instance, if we wanted to influence the constitution making, as we did, you don't react very forcefully only at the last moment. I mean, everybody knew in India, anybody who was following Nepal knew in India, that this leadership of Nepal does not have its heart in a really inclusive constitution. Therefore, we must have started working for a very long time. we were complacent to a very large extent, and suddenly when they, in about 10 days time, when they finished their constitution, we woke up and sent the foreign secretary as a special envoy of the prime minister. He didn't go as a foreign secretary. He went as a special envoy of the prime minister to do what? To say don't promulgate the constitution. That doesn't happen. I mean, having lost that, okay, we have not been able to shape the constitution, we should have waited for, therefore, anyway, I don't want
Let us
to
not get into
specific details, but Nepal is in a bad situation. Pakistan, despite Mr. Modi's surprise visit to Lahore, nothing seems to be moving, either on terrorism front or on the normal talks.
It's like you take one step forward, two steps back.
I would say even China. There is no real change which is visible. I mean, this kind of a relationship, good here, bad here, was there during Manmohan Singh's regime. And a promise which was made that we would turn the neighborhood into an arena of harmony and robust cooperation actually has not
happened. Mr. Bhadrakumar?
Yeah, taking it up from where Professor Muni is very stimulating his remarks. To my mind, we can approach this subject holding some yardsticks, some norms. And these are not norms we are imposing on the situation, because these norms are really attributable to Mr. Modi himself in his, during his campaign in 2014. Number one, how do you relate the foreign policy of this government with the national agenda? That is the number one question. Mr. Modi was very emphatic about it, about a disconnect having developed. Number two, a big ship like India can only take an arc over a length of time, so there is bound to be continuity. But Mr. Modi promised creativity, a new approach, neighborhood policies in particular. So this dialectic between continuity and change, this is another norm. And the third one is we are in an extraordinary international situation. Whether our diplomacy has been optimal, suboptimal, or ineffective. So you see, these are the three norms, with which we can approach the subject from on the basis of what Mr. Modi had pledged during the 2014 campaign. Now, in terms of the first one, national agenda, I think it is not important to analyze the vicissitudes of the bilateral relationship from year to year, from 2014 to 2015 and 2015 to 2016. Because, we are a great nation and we have our own concepts of time and space. We can move there. But in the immediate sense and in the medium term, what is very important is the national agenda. And Mr. Modi had said that, about very, very much he had spoken about a development agenda.
Right.
Now, to what extent has the foreign policy been helpful there? Two ways. One is in terms of, the economic part of it. And he, in fact, had said that he's going to revamp the foreign ministry, the foreign policy establishment, and put economic diplomacy on the driving seat. I see no traces of it. Now, in terms of it, for instance, agrarian crisis, a phenomenal fall in the export performance, and job creation. It's frightening. 1.5 million close to people entering the job market every year. So every month, job creations 134,000, 1.3 lakhs is what we created last year. So there is a terrible, and already 140 million.
But
backlog.
how do you?
So you see, the point is, what I'm trying to say is, Girish, then on the security side, the point is the development agenda cannot proceed without a favorable external environment. And that environment has to be created, and it should have been the prime task of the Indian diplomacy. And that now, there is, therefore, a disconnect here, very clearly a disconnect. I think foreign policy has failed to deliver in terms of the national agenda, if you look at it. Then the second part, if you look at it in terms of continuity and change, actually in the neighborhood, I found nothing creative here. And in certain places where the UPA managed
the most creative thing was to get all those people together for the swearing-in ceremony.
I don't think it was creative. I think it was an impulsive decision because, for the lack of follow-up on a very flimsy excuse that the Pakistani High Commissioner met the Hurriyat man, the entire initiative collapsed, which only shows that basically the problem is that, that there is really no thinking, no concept how to handle the relationship. So I think there is a problem here. I think the only change that has happened is in terms of the relations with the United States.
Yes.
There again, if you look at it with a penetrating look, you would find that the change is actually in terms of the military cooperation.
We will come to the
Now,
US.
the last part I have
Yes.
not touched, and you must give me an
Yeah, you
opportunity.
should. Yeah.
That is the international situation.
Right.
I have a feeling that despite all the propaganda by the American think tankers and lobbies in India, I think non-alignment as a concept, as an ideology, has a continuing relevance.
But
And
that-
the international situation
and that seems
is
to have
very
been given up?
conducive for that.
And that seems to have been given up, the non-alignment.
We are not exploring the possibilities.
Would you like to react to that, Mr. Sikri?
Well, Bhadran has said so many things, but I have a
No,
somewhat...
about the creativity aspect. What he is talking about, the creative diplomacy, we have not found. He says that.
Look, I
Was
think
there a space for creative diplomacy?
I personally think that Mr. Modi's diplomacy has been far more creative than he's given credit for. And I do see a certain pattern, a certain strategic thrust to it. Certainly much, much better than what the UPA 1 and 2 were all about. So I don't agree with Bhadran on those aspects. As far as the development agenda is concerned, well, every policy has to serve that purpose. But your development agenda in economic terms cannot be met with your neighborhood only.
Not just neighborhood.
Now
Not
that's
just
why you have to
neighborhood.
look at the wider world,
Yes.
how much investment is coming in, are people looking at India more seriously? And if you were to look at it from that perspective, I think that Mr. Modi has delivered much more than previous governments
Okay.
have.
Sanjay, how would you look at it? Let's look at the neighborhood. What do you think of the neighborhood policy?
I think he started with great energy. I mean, if you remember the time when he got everybody together, he raised certain expectations. But look at Nepal. It's a real tragedy how things are unfolding. And at various stages, the government seemed totally clueless. They didn't know how to break the blockade, how to break the logjam. And now you have a very unsavory situation, which was, with the going away of the ambassador. It was rumored that he was being used for organizing a coup against the Prime Minister and the President of Nepal in prison. So there have been many episodes which caused a great amount of embarrassment. You look at what happened in Pathankot. You had the ISI people coming and investigating, not being reciprocated. All that just did not go with the image that he had come. He had promised a more muscular, more creative foreign policy. So we see a lot of muscular approach to things, but it all boils down to tactics. I don't think there is certainty or there is great insight into how things are going to pan out. Maybe it has something to do with how everything is centralized. You have a foreign minister who doesn't really get much space. And India has a big role to play. India has a responsibility towards neighborhood. More demands are being made on India. And I think a more energetic foreign minister who had his or her say would have made a major difference to how foreign policy was conducted. So from every standpoint, despite great effort made by the Prime Minister, it's just not moving anywhere. And there is also a breakdown of consensus that you see. I mean, there is a major issue pertaining to India's growing proximity with the US. It's a matter which should have been debated. I mean, especially the logistic agreement that we're talking about. And it is just going away, although it has not been signed as yet. But those are the things that in a democratic society need to be debated more vigorously, which hasn't really happened.
Okay. Mr. Sikri, coming back to you, about this India-US relationship. The Prime Minister himself has called US India's principal strategic partner. And, US is giving some kind of almost a NATO kind of ally status to India. So, how does other forces, other people look at other countries, look at our relationship with US, and you think that's the best way to go ahead?
Look, I think that Mr. Modi, notwithstanding any personal misgivings that he may have had, very early came to the conclusion that India was not going to be able to move ahead with its development agenda unless the United States was on its side, or was certainly neutral. There's also the security concerns relating to China, for which you need the United States' help. So I think that he has rightly, and I say this deliberately because I have been one of the critics of the Indo-US nuclear deal, because I felt that that was the basis of that deal was completely flawed. Whereas today I find that Mr. Modi is trying to develop a relationship with the USA on the basis of mutual interest. There's not just a complete giveaway to the United States. And I think that while he's developing relations with the United States, he's also carefully and consciously and rightly trying to balance it out by keeping the lines open to China. You know, the president is in China today, just 2 weeks before he himself goes to the United States. So we've had an engagement with China also and with Russia also. So it's never going to be an easy task. But I think one thing is quite clear. Mr. Modi has come to the conclusion that you need the United States on your side in order for India to develop. And that's why it's important.
Professor Muni,
Well, I think this is true that
is that the right approach?
well,
There are two, because obviously there are two different opinions on this.
my view is that a section of the policy making community always felt that if you get closer to the US, most of your problems will be sorted out, particularly vis-a-vis China. I think this is an assumption on which the policy has moved, and there is no doubt that Mr. Modi has put India much closer to the US than it was earlier. Now, some of the assumptions are still being debated in the establishment, like these 4 basic agreements. We have signed one, with the second one we have redefined in a different way, and there are still 2 left. If you read Nisha Biswal's statement recently yesterday, I mean, it shows very clearly that yes, US wants us to move in a particular direction, has high hopes of it. We have a lot of hopes out of the US, but there are a lot of steps which need to be very carefully calibrated and taken, which have not yet been taken. So yes, there is a direction so far as the Indo-US relationship is concerned, but whether this is the right direction is a matter of debate within India. I mean, there are people still saying that is this going to retain your strategic autonomy, and changing Chinese behavior, there is not a bit of change, all said and done. I mean, you saw that on either NSG issue, you can see it, either they are going and working in the Pak-occupied Kashmir, you can see it. There is absolutely no way in which the Chinese would simply be deterred that if we are getting close to the US, everything is, in fact, it there are many people who assume that this has a reverse reaction from the Chinese side.
Well, Mr. Bhadrakumar,
Yes.
this security concern which Mr. Sikri talks about as far as China is concerned, is that now a very conscious Indian policy
You see, what is
to be closer to US?
If Ambassador Sikri meant by security considerations that if there is a conflict with China, American troops will come and fight for us, or we want them to do that, then if we want them to do that, or for example, in fighting terrorism, Americans will stand shoulder to shoulder. We all know that there is a double speak on that. I mean, much more they could have done. They didn't do it.
And then they sold the fighter planes to Pakistan.
Yeah, this great discovery about the importance of the United States as a partner is not really Mr. Modi's. This has been, happening right since the middle of the 90s. And Mr. Manmohan Singh's, let me finish. You finished and let me finish now. Now, the point is Mr. Manmohan Singh was no different. It was there, but the point is, how do you keep an equilibrium? Because you must understand this is an unequal partnership. You are dealing actually with a superpower, and you don't have many trump cards to play. And by going this far in a certain direction, like for example, when Obama came here, that famous joint vision statement on the Asia Pacific, I think it was completely unnecessary, because I'll go back
provoked the Chinese?
I go back to what Ambassador Muni said, which is this, that that in the ultimate analysis, you have to deal with your problems with China bilaterally, yourself. And that is a long, protracted process. And this kind of a lurch towards the United States can only become a complicating factor. And I have a feeling some of the Chinese behavior since January last year in a certain direction have emanated out of that. A certain perception. China has never protested against India's modernization of military. So if you want to buy weapon systems from the United States, China has no problem. China is countering it in its own way. It has a hefty defense budget for it. But the point is the strategic part of it. When you know, for example, the Pacific Command, Admiral Harris speaks and so confidently in the US Congress that it's a matter of time, we are just near it, joint patrols in the South China Sea. I mean, he doesn't speak from thin air, there must be some basis for it. And so this is complicated, in fact, the process that was very brilliantly handled, I think, by the team under Mr. Manmohan Singh. This
balance has been upset?
between competition and cooperation, which was very delicately developed, during Mr. Manmohan Singh's time and handed over to us. Now, for example, I think my understanding is that even on the border talks, I think Mr. Shiv Shankar Menon's time as National Security Advisor, we traveled quite a bit. In fact, much of it is not in the public realm. But when Mr. Manmohan Singh handed over, he handed over a almost predictable relationship with China.
And that has been upset, you think? Okay, Sanjay, now let us leave US relations. As far as West Asia is concerned, where are we heading? The recent visit of the Prime Minister to Iran is being seen as some kind of a path-breaking thing. You think so? India has been able to balance, its other interests in that region?
I think what the Prime Minister has been able to do is to somehow balance his visit to Saudi Arabia and Iran, which is, I think, a big plus, because at the time when he returned from Saudi Arabia, the Iranians were very upset, and the kind of friendly noises the Saudi Arabians were making, they were not sure whether the Chabahar would go through or much of the promises that they had made would go through. But the fact that, he's been able to go to Iran and sign the deal and go ahead with, by sidestepping Pakistan and to some extent even China, which is invested in Gwadar, this is a big event in certain ways, but I'm not very sure the implications it would have on China. As Mr. Bhadrakumar was saying, that if an impression goes around that we are doing much of this posturing at the behest of somebody else, and if in a certain way the tension of the South China Sea, ends up showing up in the Gulf of Oman and the area around that, then we have to figure out whether we are capable of handling that, because now we must recognize China is not just a neighbor on one side, it's also a neighbor on the other side, parking at Gwadar and investing a colossal amount of money and funds there. So it's a tricky situation. There could be some appreciation for the fact that he went to Iran, but I don't know whether it has been thought through and how much it has been thought through.
Okay, Mr. Sikri?
Well, I think
This region. Yes.
I think that Prime Minister Modi has done well to reach out to the principal Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates. I believe we might be going to Qatar also shortly. This is an area that was neglected for a while. Certainly, it was grossly neglected under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. And now I think that we need to have a much greater economic and security presence in the region, which I believe that we are moving towards. Just one point I want to make about China. If China is upset about our getting close to the United States, I think we also have reason to be upset that China has been using Pakistan very much to further its interests, and they completely ignore our concerns. It's a huge force multiplier. So China is no angel as far as their attitude towards India is concerned. The intrusion when Xi Jinping was in Ahmedabad was not coincidental. So I think that in order to tackle China, we should understand it is not going to be possible to do it only bilaterally. It's part of a larger picture, and our relations with other countries, including the United States and Japan, are going to figure in that. I mean, if, for example, China were to keep Pakistan out of the bilateral equation with India, things would improve greatly for us. But they are not going to do it, and they have signaled both through the One Belt, One Road, the NSG, Masood Azhar, all that they are not going to give up Pakistan.
So is this the way to, the question is this the way to go ahead, you know?
No, I
So
think-
wouldn't we be, you know, are we in a position to take on China at a
No,
large level?
it's not a question of are we in a position. I think we must give up our diffidence. We have to deal with China. It is a much stronger power. We should not be rash in dealing with China. But being very meek and submissive is also not the answer.
Okay, Professor Muni?
Have we been able to give our response? For instance, the Belt and Road Initiative, we still are utterly confused how to react to this, and we completely lost.
And it is going through Pak
and
occupied
complete
Kashmir.
loss in responding to what is happening in the neighborhood, which seems to be worrying us. Even in terms of China getting into Pak occupied Kashmir, the Chinese made much more noise of India digging oil in the Vietnam offshore area than we have protested against them. Then when Mr. Xi is visiting here, you had the great incident of the border encroachment, which made Mr. Modi give a very terse press statement at that time, that unless you improve on the strategic matters, the other cooperation would not improve in economic matters which we want to do. Now, I don't understand if we have a package of policy moves in order to take on or deal with the Chinese challenge, diplomatic challenge. I am not talking militarily. And it's not visible, if at all it is there, despite all the brave talks about we can do this, we can do. Now, if piggybacking the US is the only answer, I am afraid it is going to push us into trouble.
Okay.
Because this would not be the answer.
Mr. Bhadrakumar, you know, very quickly, because we are running completely out of time, the Act East policy, you think that has worked?
You see, this Act-East policy makes a very good rhetoric, but essentially the Southeast Asian countries, they are very, very well clued in on what they want, and they are very serious economic partners. India has not been able to offer that partnership. Now, you take countries there individually, if you take countries, there are much more that they have to do with China. China is a driver of growth for the entire region. Look at the trade statistics. It's absolutely pathetic, you know. So Act-East, what does it mean, Act-East? I really don't understand.
Okay.
Act-East means, does it mean that, you know, like to use the word, you know, it is piggy riding? Is that what Act-East is?
Very quickly, sir. Mr.
I think Act-East is more than Southeast Asia, and Japan is a very important partner in our Act-East policy. Second, I think today the defense and security component of the Act-East policy is as important, if not more important, than the economic component. And then finally, I'd just like to make one point. You know, we talk about Mr. Modi having done this or not done that, the government doing it or not doing things properly. But here there are two other factors which are important. One is the role of the media. How much attention does it give to various aspects of foreign policy if you're not there? And two, I think there's the public also. The recent incident which has happened with the African student, which has the Africans up in arms,
we didn't have time to discuss Africa.
is
in
very
fact.
important. So
It's
I
very
think
important.
that in addition to the government,
Yes.
the media and the public also are very
Absolutely.
important.
The African thing, we have had completely run out of time. We maybe we'll have to do another program to discuss the various other aspects of the foreign policy which needs to be discussed. But as everybody on the panel said, that it's a mixed bag of what has been. We'll wait and watch what will be there in the coming year as far as the foreign policy is concerned. Thanks to all my guests. Please keep watching. We'll come back with other issues, big picture, same time.